The first time Willow Tarns threatened to foreclose on my house, I was elbow deep in a busted sink trap under my kitchen counter. I nearly cracked my head on the cabinet door from laughing. "You think this is a joke, York?" she shrieked from the front porch, her voice echoing through the screen door. "You signed the HOA agreement. You owe your share for the clubhouse renovation. That's $12,000. I wiped my hands on a rag and stood up. "Willow, I'm not paying 12 grand so you can install a wine bar and a yoga deck for your book club." Her eyes narrowed behind her oversized sunglasses. "It's not just for me, it's for the community." "The community didn't vote on it," I said. "You and your little HOA board cooked that up behind closed doors." She stepped closer, heels clicking on the porch like some villain out of a soap opera. "You're part of this neighborhood, York Zanders. That means you follow the rules. If you don't pay, we'll take your house." "It's that simple." I stared at her for a long second. "You're out of your mind." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "You'll be hearing from our legal team." "I am a legal team," I fired back. "And if you try to foreclose on me without a community vote, I'll bury this HOA so deep in lawsuits you'll be holding meetings in a cardboard box." That shut her up for a second. I'd moved into Brookpine Estates 3 years ago. Quiet neighborhood, decent schools, and back then the HOA was just a bunch of retirees arguing over lawn lengths and mailbox paint. I joined the board to keep things honest. But then Willow got elected president last year and everything went downhill. She started pushing community enhancements that seemed to only benefit her and her clique. First, it was the $600 rose garden near her yard. Then the private security patrol that only circled her cul-de-sac. And now, the clubhouse renovation complete with a hot tub, marble floors, and a sound system that could wake the dead. Total cost over 200 grand. She claimed it was a community upgrade, but no one I knew had voted for it. And when I asked for meeting minutes or a budget breakdown, she refused to hand them over, so I stopped paying. That's when the threats started. First, it was letters stuffed in my mailbox unsigned, but clearly from her. Then came the fines. $200 for non-compliance, $500 for disruption. Then the foreclosure warning, hand-delivered with a smug little smile. I wasn't scared. I was furious. I knew the law, and I knew she was bluffing, but she had power, and she was getting bold. So I did what any sane person would do. I installed cameras. Every angle of my property covered. I started recording board meetings. I printed every letter, every email, every voicemail. I built a case, because if Willow wanted a war, I was ready to bring one right to her doorstep. HOA story hoastories homeowner association stories by the following Tuesday, I had already filed a public records request with the county clerk's office. I wanted everything, every permit, every budget line, every contractor invoice tied to the so-called clubhouse renovation. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. I just drove downtown, filled out the forms, and waited. The documents arrived in a manila envelope 2 days later. I sat at my dining room table, coffee going cold beside me, flipping through page after page. Half of it was nonsense, overblown estimates, vague itemizations, but one thing jumped out immediately: no competitive bids. Every contract had gone to the same construction firm, Keystone Concepts. I'd never heard of them. I looked them up. Their website was a single page with a stock photo of a smiling man in a hard hat and a phone number that went straight to voicemail. No social media presence, no reviews. The business address, a UPS store in the next town over. That didn't smell right. I ran the business through the state's corporate registry. The owner, a man named Curtis Tarns, same last name as Willow. My pulse picked up. I checked the HOA board roster again. No Curtis listed anywhere. I opened the property records. Curtis Tarns owned the house directly behind Willow's. It had been vacant for over a year. I stood up and went to the window that faced the back fence. The house behind mine was dark, but the porch light flicked on at dusk like clockwork. Automatic timer. No cars in the driveway, no trash cans ever rolled out on pickup day. So this was how she'd done it. She'd funneled the HOA money to a shell company under her cousin's name, maybe brother, maybe ex-husband, who knew and pretended it was a legitimate contractor. No real work crews ever showed up at the clubhouse. Just one white van twice a week with tinted windows and no logo. They'd gutted the place in days, then disappeared. No one had seen any actual renovations since then, but the HOA kept claiming progress. I knew what I had to do. I brought everything to Marlene. She lived 5 houses down on the corner, ran a small paralegal business out of her garage, and had a reputation for being the unofficial historian of Brookpine Estates. If it had ever happened in this neighborhood, Marlene had the receipts. She opened her storm door before I even knocked. "If you're coming to talk about Willow, get in line," she said, stepping aside. "She's laundering HOA money." Her eyes widened. "Come again." I handed her the file I'd copied. "The company she hired for the clubhouse, it's fake, registered under a guy who owns the empty house behind her. No business license, no proof of work. I think she's siphoning funds." Marlene looked through the papers, flipping fast, her lips tightening. "Well, this explains why the clubhouse still smells like mildew and cheap paint." She told the board it was mid-renovation and not safe to enter. "She's bluffing. There's nothing going on in there." She set the folder down. "You want to bring this to the board?" "I want to bring it to the police." Marlene hesitated, then nodded. "Let me print a few things." I've been keeping copies of the HOA's bank statements for years. Public records. But I've never seen something this blatant. Within an hour, we were sitting in a booth at the precinct across town. Officer Riley took our statements without much enthusiasm until Marlene pulled out the matching transaction records. Over $180,000 in checks written to Keystone Concepts over the past 6 months. All signed by Willow Tarns. Riley sat up straighter. "This is all from an HOA account," I nodded. "She's threatening to foreclose on my property over a debt she invented. That money went to a company that doesn't exist." "All right," he said. "We're opening a fraud investigation." By the time we got back to the neighborhood, word had already started to spread. Marlene had sent a few quiet texts to trusted residents asking if they'd paid any special assessments. A dozen people called her back within an hour, furious that their money had disappeared with no visible improvements. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of metal clanking. I went outside and found a tow truck hooking up to my pickup. "Hey," I ran toward the guy. "What are you doing?" He looked up, confused. "Work order from the HOA said this truck's abandoned." "It's my driveway," I said, pointing, "and I drove it yesterday." He checked the clipboard again. "Says here it's been unmoved for over 30 days, HOA violation. It was petty and desperate." I pulled out my phone and showed him the time-stamped footage from my driveway camera, me unloading tools the night before, engine still warm. He blinked. "Look, I just follow the orders. If you've got proof, I'll cancel the pickup." "You do that. And make sure whoever sent this gets the message." He drove away, tires crunching on the gravel. That afternoon, a certified letter arrived. Inside was a copy of the foreclosure filing. Willow had actually filed it. She'd gone to court and claimed I owed the HOA over $13,000 in unpaid assessments and penalties. She'd even attached a spreadsheet handwritten in pencil with made-up fees. I brought the letter straight to my lawyer, a guy named Trent I'd met years ago on a zoning case. He read it, his eyebrows slowly rising. "She submitted this as evidence?" "Yep," he leaned back in his chair. "She's going to lose her position, possibly her freedom." I raised an eyebrow. "You think it'll go that far?" "York, she submitted fake financial documents to a court of law." "That's fraud. And if she's been using HOA money for personal gain, that's embezzlement. The police are already involved. This isn't just a civil case anymore." The next day, 2 detectives showed up at Willow's house. They didn't knock. They walked straight up with a warrant and let themselves in. I watched from my porch as she came out 10 minutes later in a robe and slippers, shouting about her rights while they guided her into the back of a cruiser. She saw me across the street. Her expression flickered not fear, not anger, just disbelief. Like she couldn't comprehend that this was happening to her. I didn't wave. By the end of that week, the rest of the HOA board resigned. One of them, a man named Ed who mostly kept to himself, admitted under questioning that Willow had promised them community perks in exchange for silence. Free landscaping, waived dues, special privileges for their grandkids at the pool. Nothing on paper, of course. Marlene stepped in as acting president temporarily. Her first act was to freeze the HOA account. Her second was to call an emergency community meeting. When I showed up to the clubhouse still reeking of mildew despite the renovation, it was standing room only. She stood at the front, holding a microphone from a portable speaker system someone had brought in from their garage. "We're going to fix this," she said. "But first, we need to decide what fixing it looks like. No more secret votes. No more backroom deals. From now on, every decision is public, every dollar accounted for." I glanced around, people nodded. A few clapped. "We have options," she continued. "We can press charges. We can restructure the bylaws. We can even dissolve the HOA entirely." That got a murmur. Someone in the back called out, "Can we just go back to when it was about lawns and paint colors?" A few people laughed. Someone else shouted, "I want my money back." Marlene held up a hand. "We'll get it." But it won't happen overnight. What we do today determines whether this neighborhood goes back to being a community or stays a playground for the next Willow. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The evidence had already done the talking. The community had decided. And the clubhouse Willow fought so hard to control. It was about to get repurposed as a symbol of everything she failed to take from us. The temporary calm after Willow's arrest didn't last long. By the following week, the financial auditors Marlene brought in uncovered another nasty surprise. Nearly $30,000 in undocumented expenses labeled as maintenance consulting. No invoices, no vendor names, just vague line items and matching check numbers. Marlene called me the minute she opened the report. "They were still pulling money after the so-called renovation started," she said, pacing her driveway with a copy of the ledger in her hand. "And guess what? 2 of the checks were deposited into an account under the name Camden Locke." "Who's that?" I asked, though the name sounded vaguely familiar. "Willow's nephew. He was listed as a contractor liaison in one of the old board meeting memos. Which, by the way, were never properly archived." I exhaled slowly, watching a pair of crows fight over something in my neighbor's gutter. "So this is bigger than just a clubhouse scam. Much bigger. We're talking coordinated embezzlement. Possibly conspiracy to defraud." We met that afternoon at the community center down by the lake, the only building in Brookpine not tainted by the HOA's mismanagement. Trent, my lawyer, joined us, along with Detective Lynn from Financial Crimes. She had a quiet intensity, the kind that made people nervous even when they hadn't done anything wrong. Trent laid out the updated evidence, falsified financials, kickbacks to family members, and a timeline that proved funds were being siphoned off for nearly a year. Lynn didn't say much. She just took notes, occasionally glancing up with a look that said she'd seen this kind of thing before, but rarely in a neighborhood association. "We'll need to expand the investigation," she said finally, flipping her notebook shut. "It's not just Willow. Your former treasurer signed off on these disbursements. That makes him complicit at the very least." Marlene nodded grimly. "He's already skipped town, sold his house last month, moved to Arizona." "Then we'll get a subpoena for his financials," Lynn replied. "If he wired any of that money out of state, it becomes federal. And if they coordinated this across multiple people, we may be looking at racketeering." I blinked. "You're saying this could go federal?" She didn't blink. "It already is." The following morning, 2 unmarked sedans rolled into Brookpine and parked outside the clubhouse. Federal agents, badges on belts, jackets unzipped, walked straight in with a locksmith. I stood across the street, pretending to weed the edge of my lawn as they carried out 3 boxes of files, a hard drive, and what looked like a full desktop computer wrapped in clear plastic. By noon, The news had spread, not just through Brookpine but across the county. Local reporters showed up, circling the cul-de-sac like vultures. One of them tried to interview me. I declined. I wasn't interested in being the face of anything. Later that evening, as I was fixing the light fixture in my garage, a knock came at the side door. I opened it to find a man in his 60s, tall and wiry, wearing a faded denim jacket and carrying a small leather folder. "You're Xander's, right?" he asked. "Yeah, who are you?" "Name's Boyd. Used to be HOA president here, long time ago." Before Willow got involved. I stepped aside and motioned him in. He walked with a noticeable limp, favoring his left leg. "I've been watching this mess from my daughter's place over in Eastgate," he said, settling into an old work stool. "Didn't think I'd ever come back, but when I saw her name in the paper, I knew exactly what had happened." "You knew her family. Her dad was on the board in the 80s, real piece of work. Got booted after trying to force everyone to use a single landscaping company." "His company?" I leaned against the wall. "So this runs in the family." Boyd nodded once. "I tried to warn people when Willow first ran. She showed up out of nowhere, said she wanted to modernize the HOA, got herself elected by promising a dog park and free Wi-Fi. Next thing I hear, she's calling herself a community executive officer and handing out fines like candy." He opened his folder and pulled out a yellowed envelope. Inside were meeting transcripts from 14 years ago, back when the neighborhood was half its current size. One transcript caught my eye, a vote to limit HOA power over personal property rights. It passed by majority but had never been added to the bylaws. "She buried it," Boyd said, tapping the paper. "If this had made it in, she never could have threatened you with foreclosure." I took a photo of the document and sent it to Marlene. She replied within a minute, "This changes everything." The next community meeting was standing room only again, but this time the atmosphere was electric. People weren't just angry, they were energized. Marlene stood at the front with a stack of printed packets. Each one included the original transcript, the updated criminal charges filed against Willow and her associates, and a proposal for structural reforms. Trent was there too, not as my lawyer, but as a guest speaker. Brookpine's HOA was never structured to withstand this level of corruption, he explained calmly. It was built on trust and volunteerism. That worked fine for a while. But as your neighborhood grew, so did the opportunity for abuse. He stepped aside as Marlene took the mic. "We're voting tonight," she said. "Not on new fountains or garden benches. We're voting on dissolving the current HOA and replacing it with a resident council elected, transparent, accountable, and with limited power." Someone near the back asked, "Can we even do that legally?" Trent raised his hand. "Yes, your bylaws include a dissolution clause. It was never removed, just never publicized. You need a 60% majority." Votes were cast on paper slips, counted in front of everyone. By the end, it wasn't even close. 74% in favor, the HOA as we knew it was dead. The following month was a blur of reform. The resident council formed, comprised of 7 members with staggered terms. Boyd took a seat as historical advisor. Marlene stayed on as chairwoman until the first election. I declined a nomination but agreed to help draft the new charter. We brought in an independent accountant to trace every dollar from the last 3 years. Refunds were issued where possible. Camden Locke was arrested in another county while trying to withdraw $9,000 from a flagged account. The former treasurer was picked up in Tucson and extradited within 2 weeks. As for Willow, her trial was set for the end of the year. The charges included wire fraud, falsifying financial documents, misappropriation of funds, and obstruction. Her bail was denied after she was caught trying to transfer property to a cousin in Nevada. The clubhouse, once a symbol of her vanity, was stripped down to its bones. Volunteers came in to repaint, rip out the half-finished bar, and install shelves for a community library. The hot tub was sold off to cover legal fees. The marble floors, turns out they were vinyl overlays, We tore them up and found cracked concrete underneath. Marlene called it poetic. I just called it done. One evening, months later, I sat on my front porch watching a pair of kids ride scooters down the street. The neighborhood felt different now, not perfect, but real. The fake politeness had vanished, replaced by genuine conversations and loud opinions. I liked it better that way. Boyd walked by with his dog, gave me a nod. Told you she'd overreach. You did, I said, but I didn't think she'd drive the whole thing off a cliff, he chuckled. Sometimes that's what it takes, burn it down to rebuild it right. I didn't argue. The wind kicked up, rustling the leaves in the old oak across the street. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't just defending a home, I was part of a neighborhood that had finally woken up. And this time, nobody was going to sleepwalk into another Willow Tarns power trip. Not on my watch. The first council election came around faster than anyone expected. After the dissolution of the old HOA, Brookpine Estates felt like a dam that had finally burst. Residents who had never so much as attended a barbecue were suddenly running campaigns, handing out flyers, and working late into the evenings organizing fair voting procedures. For the first time since I moved in, people weren't just tolerating each other, they were building something together. I stayed out of the race, not because I wasn't interested, but because I knew my role had already been played. I'd exposed the rot. Now it was time to let others plant something new in its place. Still, I kept my ears open. Especially when a new name popped up on the ballot for financial oversight. Claire Denton. Claire had moved into the neighborhood only 4 months prior, during the height of the investigation. She worked in forensic accounting for a regional bank and had a talent for spotting financial discrepancies, the way a bloodhound picks up on a scent. She wasn't loud or flashy, but the moment she spoke at the candidates' forum, the entire community took notice. The problem wasn't just Willow, she told the crowd gathered outside the converted Clubhouse, now library. It was the fact that no one could see what she was doing until it was too late. That's not going to happen again. She won her seat in a landslide. 3 weeks into her role, Claire discovered something buried deep in a digital archive Marlene had recovered from the former treasurer's cloud account. It was a scanned invoice, dated almost 2 years prior, listing a series of consultation sessions at a private property on the west end of the community property that, until recently, had been zoned commercial. Claire brought it straight to me. The sessions were billed as architectural assessments for the clubhouse, she said, placing the printout in front of me on my kitchen table. But the address isn't the clubhouse. It's a parcel owned by a development firm called Oakvale Holdings. I looked at the name and felt something twist in my stomach. Why does that sound familiar? Because Oakvale Holdings is run by Devin Rusk, Willow's former campaign donor. The one who tried to get the zoning changed last year to build luxury duplexes. I ran a hand through my hair. You're saying the HOA was funneling money into a developer's private project? Worse, she said. I pulled the county zoning records. There was a petition to reclassify that parcel from commercial to residential multi-use. It had 14 signatures, all forged. I cross-checked them with our resident list. 4 of them are names of people who have been dead for over a year. The rest don't even live in Brookpine. I stood up. We need to take this to the DA. We met with Assistant District Attorney Liana Corbett the following morning. She had already been overseeing the criminal case against Willow and her associates, but the new documentation made her pause. She flipped through the invoices, zoning proposals, and signature comparisons with a growing look of disgust. This isn't just embezzlement anymore, she said, setting the folder down. This is attempted real estate fraud on a municipal scale. They were trying to rezone property to inflate its value using fake community support, and they financed it with illegally diverted HOA funds. Claire leaned forward. Do you have jurisdiction? Corbett nodded. Yes. And I'll be petitioning the grand jury for an expanded indictment. The next few weeks unfolded like a domino chain. Devin Rusk was arrested at a golf club in Eastfield. According to the reports, he tried to claim he was collaborating with the HOA on a green housing initiative. But the documents told another story. Bank transfers linked to Oakvale Holdings showed a pattern of deposits from the HOA's discretionary fund, the same fund Willow had used to pay for the fake clubhouse upgrades. Even more damning, a city councilman named Gerald Price was brought in for questioning. His signature had appeared on a recommendation letter attached to the zoning proposal, endorsing it on behalf of the Brookpine Estates Homeowners Association. Only problem? He'd never met anyone on the board and the letter was a forgery. The fallout reached the county level. The councilman was suspended pending investigation, and the rezoning request was formally voided. Claire, working with Marlene and 2 other council members, submitted a motion for restitution. The county approved it. Within 60 days, a court-ordered repayment plan was established, forcing the sale of 2 properties linked to Oakvale Holdings to refund the stolen HOA funds. With that money, the council created a community improvement trust, locked behind a 5-signature release system and publicly viewable online. Meanwhile, Willow's trial began. The courtroom was packed on the first day, mostly with residents from Brookpine. Some of them wore shirts with slogans like "No more shadows" and "Our street, our rules." I sat near the back, arms crossed, watching as the prosecution laid out a 34-count indictment that included wire fraud, misappropriation of funds, falsifying legal documents, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. Willow sat at the defendant's table in a navy blazer, hands folded like she was attending a PTA meeting. Her attorney tried to argue that she was manipulated by her associates and that the financial decisions had been delegated. But the paper trail was too solid. Emails, handwritten notes, voicemails. One recording, pulled from a board meeting I'd filmed months ago, captured her saying, "They'll never know the difference, we'll just call it beautification." The jury took less than 4 hours to deliberate guilty. She was sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole before serving at least 7. 2 of the former board members received 5-year sentences. Rusk got 8, and a lifetime ban from holding any development license in the state. When the verdict was read, Willow didn't speak. She stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, eyes empty. She was escorted out of the courtroom in silence. Back in Brookpine, things didn't return to normal, they moved forward. The resident council voted to repurpose the old HOA office into a community resource center. It offered legal workshops, tax assistance, and eventually, a rotating series of town hall-style meetings where residents could propose ideas and vote in real time. Claire established a monthly financial transparency newsletter, complete with itemized spending and upcoming proposals. Every resident got a copy, and feedback was encouraged, not just tolerated. I spent more time on my porch again, but these days, it wasn't to monitor or wait for the next scheme. It was to talk. Neighbors stopped by. Kids rode past on bikes waving. One evening, Boyd dropped off a box of old HOA records he'd kept in his attic. "For the archives," he said. "So no one forgets how we got here." That night, I opened the box and found a photo of the original board from the early 90s. Smiling, arms around each other, standing in front of a wooden sign that read "Brookpine Estates, a community first." It felt like a prophecy finally fulfilled. We didn't just stop a foreclosure. We stopped a machine designed to control and profit off of silence. And in its place, we built something louder, messier, but honest. Brookpine wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was awake now, and it would stay that way. Because people like Willow count on darkness. They thrive in the quiet, in the apathy, in the unchecked authority of closed doors. But we'd kicked those doors open, and they weren't closing again.